Now constructor, yesterday we discussed. The concept is, this is your main function. In the main, when you create object of any class, let's say my class M1 is equal to new my class. Now what happens here we know very well. This is object creation. So here step number 1, instance member or member will be allocated memory. Understand the sequence. Sequence is very important. First, instance member or members will be allocated memory, and then second, default constructor will be called. Because why default constructor? Because while creating object we haven't passed anything. If we pass something, then parameters constructor will be called. So default constructor will be called. Now this we know, this concept we know very well. What happens here? What happens when main function gets over? Scope of M1 gets over. Scope of M1. M1 is a reference, no? It's a local variable because it is created in the main. So scope of M1 gets over here. So that is step number 1. Because of that, M1 gets removed. M1 gets removed. Now that we know that M1 is created here, and as soon as the scope is over, M1 will get deleted because M1 is also finally local variable. Now, in a language like C++, what happens? You need not know C++, but for your information. In a language like C++, what happens here? When scope of M1 gets over, destructor gets called. And that destructor destroys all instance members. So when you create object in C++, constructor gets called like all other object-oriented programming languages. But when object goes out of scope in C++, destructor gets called, which destroys all instance members. Constructor and destructor, both are exactly opposite. Constructor initializes instance members, whereas destructor removes instance members. But in Java, we do not have destructor. In Java, we do not have destructor. Then what happens? In Java, scope of M1 gets over, M1 gets removed, and then your object to which M1 was referring becomes unreferred. So that object, this is the same point actually. So that object is going to be garbage collected. Just before the object gets garbage collected, finalize method gets called. Yeah. So in Java, we do not have destructor. In Java, we have finalized method. Just before object gets garbage collected, finalized method gets called. Finalized method can be defined in order to release resources such as
लैग लैग होगा.
Guys, is there any point?
कौन सी मैम को कॉल कर